everybody. Matthew Gates is with us today. Hi, Matthew. How are you?
I'm doing very well, all things considered.
So you are the owner of Logic Insect Company, and you have also a YouTube channel called Zenthanol. So can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you're doing, and especially in the pest management industry?
Yeah, definitely. So it's actually the name of the YouTube channel, Zenthanol, is also the same as the consulting group, Zenthanol Consulting. But Logic Insect Gates is the email address that I utilize, and Logic Insect well, that actually might even be a better name, so I'll have to think about that in the future. But anyways, so I'm an integrated pest management specialist. I deal with various agricultural crops and their pests and disease, and both the curative management as well as the sort of prophylactic aspect of keeping the pest population gone before it even becomes a problem in the first place. It's usually the best way to go about it.
Okay, so we agreed to talk about crop scouting techniques today. So where do you want to start? Is there a specific way? Because I know that you're doing some classes with like training people about crop scouting techniques. So when you first come in a greenhouse, for example, where do you start?
So in the beginning, the first thing I like to do is gather as much context as I can in the first place. Everything that I can get is helpful, usually. Geographic location. So obviously going to the place physically is the best thing that I could do.
Yeah, of course.
I can get a lot of that information sometimes through other channels, usually a local agricultural extension agency like in the United States of America or somewhere else where there's analogous organizations, information on temperature, humidity outside. Are there crops in the area? You know, that's a big vector.
Yeah, that's a big thing. Especially when you start opening the vents.
Exactly, right. For example, currently with a hemp cultivation group that I'm working with currently, you know, it's March right now as we record, the beginning of March, or we're moving into the Ides of March, and you know, I'm seeing a lot more aphids and thrips because a lot of their food sources are either drying out or the seasons are changing such that they're finally like overwintering from being eggs or pupae or whatever the situation is for various pests, and they are coming into the crops more, as one expects during the warmer months.
Yeah, like almost like the battle starting as soon as you open the window, so you got to get ready for the battles. You got to get your beneficial ready ahead of time, like 2 to 3 weeks earlier, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And you know, in some cases, people can keep them all throughout the season. Some people, they grow the crops during a part of the season and then not any longer. They rotate crops, and you know, context is everything. Everyone's situation's a little bit different. It makes giving generalized sort of advice sort of difficult, but there are a few things that are easier to generalize than others.
Yeah, and then maybe you to get more information on the context, maybe you talk with the grower and you try to get an idea of how the place is organized, because maybe that's also something important, like the time that the team is allocating to pest management, and how the people are trained. Is there many, like, are they all trained to recognize insects, or is there only a few people in the greenhouse, or all that is important, right?
Absolutely. Speaking of which, you're bringing up great points. I try to encourage people to cross-train their cultivators so that they don't. Some places I know they have in the past suffered from like a confusion where they've tried to cross-train certain personnel, and they have like crop scouts that are like dedicated crop scouts that only crop scout, and then they have like other people harvesting different plants and that sort of a thing. And they had confusion that caused problems. And those problems were partly political because certain people didn't like they didn't like scouting and then having somebody say, oh, I found something where you scouted, because that caused some friction, right? Because they felt like they were being um, checked up on or micromanaged, kind of. And I would admit that in some cases, they might even be sort of mismanaged, the crop scouts, because that information gets to somebody above them and then they get in trouble. When in reality, I think that's a toxic and corrosive way to look at things. I think that having people cross-trained is actually a really good thing typically if it's implemented right, because in reality, the crop scouts aren't always the first line of defense. Your real first line of defense is your construction and the way that or rather just how the crop cultivation area is. And then you have people who are constantly in it, which might be harvesters more than crop scouts. So in my opinion, they're the real first line of defense.
Of course. Yeah, because like you the scouting people, they are, even if they are dedicated to that, usually they are really scouting like a day or two in the week, and the rest of the week they are assigned to other tasks. And like pest management is a daily work. Like if you can have your whole team trained to recognize pests, then it's just amazing because you're covering the whole area.
Absolutely right, exactly. That's how I look at it, and I think that that's the best way to go about things. And I think that the more people who at least can see what the damage looks like, they might not be able to identify every species or anything like that, but if they can generally say, hey, this kind of looks like that spider mite thing that Matthew was talking about, I mean, that's great, especially if the crop scouts somehow missed it, or if it's like new growth from like the production, from the propagation area to the production zone or something like that. So I agree with you. It's a 24-hour. In some cases I've even wished that I could go to the place after hours, to see what the nocturnal arthropod pests are like the moths that come out. You don't see that during the daytime hours, so you're not even getting 100% of the information. Like, you never will get 100%, but you're even getting less because it's only within a certain time frame usually, unless you work at the place and live at the place at the same time.
Yeah, maybe another good thing to help train the people is publishing a kind of posters with all the pests in a lunchroom for the workers. Then they get trained while they are having their lunch, and they are more able to recognize them later on.
I completely agree with that. Yeah. It's honestly just a good strategy in general to like have people recognize. And I know it can be a little bit hard, especially when things ramp up, like in the spring and summer.
Yeah, that's really something that I felt every time I went in a greenhouse in the spring, with all the holiday season, from Valentine's Day, then Easter and Mother's Day. Then it's getting just crazy because there is so many things happening, and the pest management is not the priority anymore. But that's just concomitant with the rise of the pest population, and that's the period when you got to work on it the most, right?
Completely agree. Yeah. The like the most important for like cut flowers and floriculture, for example, is like, at least in America or the Americas, specifically United States, Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, Easter, of course, is a big one. And like February, March, April, like at least in San Diego, Southern California in general, kind of, February is like false spring. Like, we get a lot of rain, so that can mean a lot of mold. That can be a lot of powdery mildew or botrytis problems sometimes. So
yeah. So then you go do your visit or your tour in the crops in the greenhouse. So what is your strategy when you're walking the greenhouse?
So generally, I like to Well, I like to explain that, for example, if you were to get 100% of your samples, that would be like a census, and you'd have 100% data. You still can miss things sometimes because you're only scouting a set time period. So when I start, I try to go, well, assuming that there's no like active, pest problems, I like to go from the least infested area to the most infested area if that's known or possible to do, simply as a biosecurity measure. Um, in addition to that, though, I typically find that in cases where people they don't have dedicated crop scouts, or they do, but they're still heavily taxed in their time management, which happens, then sometimes they have to do a sample. I know some people who can do sort of census arrangements, and that's really great for them, but sometimes they have to rely on a sample. And when they do that, it's very important that the sampling is like the same in each
Mhm.
area, so that you're getting an accurate amount of data. Because if you're sampling way too much in one place and not the other, then it's not gonna have the same sort of uh, it's not gonna be congruent,
Yeah, like I think in scouting, consistency is the key word. Like you got to be able to have data and information that you can compare, and you don't want to include too many parameters. You want most of the parameters to be the same, and just having the pest number or the scouting is different,
Totally. Yeah,
so that you
exactly.
can compare from one week to the other, and then you can get a real trend on what's happening in the greenhouse.
Right. Yeah, and so keeping to that sort of sample size, it has a lot of advantages. Sometimes you have to sample more. Sometimes it makes more sense to put a little bit more attention in one place over another, and that's totally legitimate. But yeah, keeping the same sample size also means that not only do you have the same data points every week, or whatever your scouting regimen dictates, but you also like kind of use the same hours usually, and so you can
Yeah,
kind of
that's a good
reliably
point.
know.
Yeah, coming at the same time, like every week, the same day at the same time. That's a good point. That's really important.
Although sometimes, sometimes it's good to mix it up, and sometimes it's good to, like, for example, so after going through an area, I also like to check the area around the immediate cultivation zone. Like if it's on property, I like to see the property. I like to take a look at some of the weeds that might be growing. What could those be potential havens? Absolutely. A lot of people just don't consider that sort of thing, or they do, but they have other things that are more important. But when I tell them like, hey, you're spraying for whitefly, or you're releasing biocontrols for whitefly, you could be releasing less or something potentially. Um,
Dark.
yeah. You know what I mean though? It
Yeah,
could
yeah.
be very you could save a lot of resources that way by just taking a small bit of preventative measure.
And of course, you cannot see all the pests on the sticky cards.
Hmm.
So some pests like aphids or spider mites, they're on the plants. So where, because I think that's a good point to explain, is where do you look when you're looking at the plant? Where do you look to find those pests? Like, are you
Right.
looking at the young leaves, the top of the soil, the yeah,
All
go
of
ahead.
the above. I try to, so like if you have like, sometimes it's difficult because if you're scouting an area where the plants are kind of small, it can be a little bit difficult to get a lot of variability, but you can see a lot more of the surface area percentage, right? You might get pretty much all of it.
Yeah.
But if you have like a large tomato vine or an avocado tree or something like this, it can be a little bit more difficult. But I would say, yeah, the soil line is very important. Look at the stem or the trunk or whatever plant you're looking at. Look at young leaves, look at old leaves if it's possible to do this, because pests will prefer different parts of the plant because maybe the defensive compounds are less abundant in the young growth, or maybe they're more abundant in the young growth. Like that can
Yeah,
happen too.
Yeah, usually the young growth, they are softer, so they prefer it, right?
I would say so, yeah, or it's tender or something like this. I remember watching, or not watching, but reading a research report about they were looking at sort of the mechanical endurance. I'm not saying it right, but of like the mandibles of like these caterpillars, and they were like testing like how long does it take for the caterpillar's jaws to wear out, essentially. And what they found, because they looked at different cultivars of this plant, and I'm forgetting which one it was, but basically certain cultivars, like the leaves were thicker and more resilient, and it really did actually have an effect on the pest dynamic and how much damage, like surface area damage you got versus the cultivars that were more supple and tender.
Yeah, and sometimes also there are big difference from one crop to another because sometimes maybe the sap is a different taste and they prefer it, or maybe the like the volatile compounds that the plant release, or they prefer it, or so
Hmm.
that's also something to look at.
Absolutely.
So another question about when you're scouting pest and disease at the same time, or you prefer to look at one and the other after, or
Hmm. Good question. Generally speaking, I kind of like to take like a standard, like sort of an SOP. I like to create an SOP about what, like we were talking about earlier, make sure you get some young leaves, make sure you get some old leaves, make sure if you already are aware of some of your pests, look for the areas where that pest hangs out. Obviously, this will be context dependent, and that sort of a thing. Um, but I would also say that it's important to um, I'm sorry, what was it that you said something at the end there?
yeah, like are you doing separate scouting for
Oh,
disease
right, the
and
separate.
pest,
Sorry,
or
I totally
are
I
you
blanked on
doing the
what you were
whole at the same
asking.
time?
Yeah, I blanked on what you were asking exactly. I'm sorry. But yeah, generally speaking, by doing that sample, I can see both, or at least evidence of both at the same time. And just by being knowledgeable about what those things look like and are, I'll come across and observe them
Yeah,
and then document them. But not
then,
always.
yeah.
Sometimes they're invisible for a little while, so that happens too.
Yeah, but then yeah, we, as you said, with the knowledge, then you have the experience and you know how it looked like. And for
Hmm.
example, if you got a hotspot with aphids, it's usually easy because the leaves are curved, or you see the how you call that, the honeydew,
Yeah, the
or
honeydew, like from aphids and
yeah,
other.
so then yeah, then that's that's catching you high. But sometimes if it's at the end of the bench and it's really far, like 4 or 5 meters from you, maybe you can miss it.
Definitely. And like if you have a bigger plant, there's more places to hide, and sometimes you have to increase your sample size. You don't always know that the sample size that you're using now, or the SOP that you're using for the samples themselves, is adequate always. Sometimes you have to do a little experimentation. And I would also say that, as you well know, we're finding that like, different spectral imaging can sort of show us pathogens maybe before they're even visible in the visual spectrum for humans. And I'm very excited about the use of that technology. I know that people have been using it in research for like Xylella fastidiosa, the causal agent for so many problems, like Pierce's disease in grapes and quick olive decline, I think it's called, for olive trees.
Yeah, that's a technology that's used a lot right now on outdoor crops with the drones, the NDVI, normalized differential vegetative index, and
Mm,
according to the wavelength, they are able to diagnostic if there is a disease or not a couple of weeks before it really appears on the plant.
Yeah, I saw a research report that showed Xylella detection like 2 weeks before visual symptoms were possible, and like that can be very critical. I don't know. I'm very excited about seeing how that technology goes. I'm not sure if it can be used like manned. I don't know if a person can like whip up a sensor and use it in the same way. I'm not sure if that's viable yet or currently. In fact, it's something I'm very excited about. If you know anything about that, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I've read about it. I've never used it, so but that's really like the future of agriculture for sure. I don't know if you got other aspects of crop scouting or pest scouting that you want to talk about, Matthew?
Definitely. I did prepare a little bit for this. I wanted
Okay.
to talk about how beneficial, like for example, if you use biocontrols, it's super critical, in my opinion, for people to track your biocontrol usage, but also track if you're actually seeing that efficacy in the first place. Are you seeing examples of the biocontrols actually doing their job, or are you even seeing them like just moving around in general? Because that can be important for quality control if you're working with a salesperson or a representative or something like that. Um,
Yeah.
then you might be able to tell them, hey, we put out all these biocontrols, but we're not really seeing them. And then you might be able to identify a problem after the fact.
Yeah, and that really depends on the beneficial insect that you're using, because for example, it's almost impossible to find a mite that you have released on the plants. But on the other side, when you're talking about aphid management and aphid population management, then it's easier because you can see all the aphids that have been parasitized by the wasp, and it's easier to count the mummified aphids and things like that. So it depends on the beneficial you're tracking.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And like with predatory mites, it can be a little bit difficult. Like if you use multiple,
Yeah, they're so tiny.
they're so tiny, and like you can't really tell the difference. Like you can be eagle-eyed, it doesn't really matter. Like Neosilius cucumeris versus Amblysia swerskii versus Neosilius californicus. Like that's going to be a big, those
You need a
attack
microscope.
different things, but they can look very similar.
Yeah. So yeah, that depends on which one you are tracking. And about maybe we can talk a little bit about what you when you train your people for pest management. How do you train them for like doing the audit of the delivery when they receive the beneficials? What do they have to do? Yeah, do they have to do a kind of inspection, and how to do it, and how maybe the second question will be how to store them if they are not able to release them right away.
It's a very important thing to know about. Typically, there's going to be small idiosyncrasies with different distributors, different sources, and that sort of a thing. I try to tell people, I try to make it very important, I try to emphasize the importance of knowing where your biocontrols come from originally, what their source is. Like different cultures are different. Different species have little, quirks about them that make them better or worse in different contexts. That's all important. And then in addition to that, what are the different products, and does one product require one sort of like, maybe, for example, you require that the parasitic wasps are applied at like dusk or twilight. or maybe it's important that you apply them into a bucket with a little sort of shield so that sunlight and condensation doesn't pour into the
Oh,
bucket itself and kill them all.
yeah.
Little things like that.
About the wasp, I have a question for you because sometime I heard different things about it. When you release the wasp and you got your banker plants, is it better to release them on the banker plants, or is it better to release them all over the greenhouse so that they start hunting right away?
It's a good question. According to different people and different species, it will change. I personally feel like if you, like with Diglyphus Isaiah, it goes after the American serpentine leafminer, Liriomyza trifoliae, and in my experience, it's better to apply it on the crop. This was in Gerbera daisies in particular, that I'm thinking of the example in my head. But also, I know the same grower is using Aphidius colemani, I think, or Aphidius urvi, one of those two. And they're being told by the representative that they should apply it into the buckets themselves. If you have banker plants, though, I feel like you should try to do both, especially since a lot of parasitoid wasps, they'll like that nectar, and that'll really increase their longevity in the crop, and it might also increase a lot of other physiological importances like being able to hunt better and having that sugary energy in them so that they can perform at their most optimal. With predatory mites, for example, I would say definitely apply them both on the crop and also apply some on the banker plants. Like some of those predatory mites feed on pollen, and that pollen, in my experience, it can make them very fecund. It can make them increase their populations quite greatly. And the way I explain it is like this. The pollen is like foraging for like fruit, you know, like it doesn't fight back and it's smaller than you. But if you go for your prey is about the same size as you and it's going to fight back. And I know that as small little arthropods, we don't think about it like that, but that's basically what we're seeing, you know.
Yeah, and also with the mites, the problem we can have is that they don't travel too much on the plants. So you really want to have them close to their targets, right?
Definitely, right? They're not airborne. They gotta hoof it.
Yeah. Thank you very much for having you today. And I will just ask you one last question. If some people want to reach you out after the interview because they want to talk more specifically on one topic we have just talked today, how can they do that?
Absolutely. I really enjoyed it, and I'm happy to come again and again and again if you need it, because I have lots to talk about. And I really like working with you, Sebastian. If they want to find more information about integrated pest management, I have a bunch of free content on my YouTube channel, Zenthanol. I like to make that so that people who are interested in organic practices or crop scouting or any of the other subjects that we talked about, they can find out that information for free and they can learn about it and teach it to others, because I think it's just so critical that people learn about it. If you want personal help with that, you can also find me at zenthanol.com, which is my website currently, and you can also find me on my Instagram account, SyncAngel, SynchAngel, all one word, and I put a lot of content about IPM and pests and all that sort of a thing there as well.
So, I will just get all those information from you and publish it just at the end of the video so that the people can take notes about it.
Okay, absolutely.
Thank you very much, Matthew, and have a good evening. And
Yes,
thank you very much again.
you're
Bye-bye.
very welcome. And you have a good evening too.
Bye-bye.